Joining us this morning. We're happy to host this webinar for you all. This is brought to you by the NEON project. So NEON stands for National Expansion of Employment Opportunities Network. And today we have Janine Pavlik, who is our subject matter expert with the NEON project. She is the president and CEO of New England Business Associates, which is a community provider known nationally and internationally for its work in the supported and community integrated employment field. She holds a Master of Science degree in nonprofit management and has 32 years of practical experience in designing, planning, evaluating, and delivering individualized employment services for people with significant disabilities. So we're very lucky to have her. We always love her joining us for these webinars, and we always like to make it an interactive discussion as well. So feel free to speak up whenever you have a question or anything. So with that, please take it away, Janine.
Yes, thank you, Maria. And I was going to say that for those of you who don't know me, please ask questions and participate. It makes it so much more interesting and informative than me just kind of talking at you. So we're gonna hope that my slideshow works today. But like this, I'll make sure you all get a copy of the PowerPoint, so it'll be bigger. You can print it in full pages if that's what you want to do. So hopefully this will work for all of you. I apologize. So today we're talking about managing and supervising the job development process. And I need to give credit to two of my colleagues, Rick McAllister and Dave Stegan, because they were kind of the brains behind this kind of concept about, how do we really manage and supervise the job development process. So all of us have, people who are job developing, but all of us have different thoughts and ways that maybe we go about setting that service or managing that service. And so hopefully this will kind of give you some ideas to even kind of strengthen that process for your organization. So before we start, I have a question. I'd love to hear from you. Current processes that you use in managing your job development process, what does that look like?
I use a consultative sales model, kind of where we go in, what the need of the employer is, look at our labor pool, match what skills and abilities of our job seekers, and do a proposal to hire, and then provide the ongoing support. Excellent.
And do you have one or two, like a few dedicated people, or do you have multiple people doing that job development piece?
I have two people who are dedicated to job development, who are always prospecting and engaging businesses. And then I have a person who does the ongoing support piece once the job's stable.
Gotcha. Excellent. Anybody else want to share what their current process in terms of managing even that? What does that look like? All right, it's too early, so that's okay. We'll move on. So typically all of us, and especially we've always had this workforce crisis, but we spend a lot of our resources and a lot of our time on really kind of investing in our frontline staff, right? Our direct care staff. And so we have standards of practice, we have specific training that people are required to, either through our state entities or through our organizations. And that's where most of our resources could go in terms of training of our employees. Would you agree? Less so is using resources to really train our mid-level managers and supervisors. And although it's necessary certainly to train our direct care staff, our frontline staff, it's even more important to really kind of shift our focus and making sure that we're providing training and support to those mid-level managers and supervisors. And why might that be? So one thing is that, as agencies operate leaner, and so we've gone from kind of centralized service provision to more decentralized service provision. people are out in the community, people aren't as easily accessible, and yet this role played that pivotal role in effectively really kind of assigning those supports and services to the people that you serve. And so it's those staff, those mid-level managers and supervisors who are the ones kind of looking at the workflow and what needs to be done. And they need to be empowered and have the competency in which to be able to do that to best meet everybody's needs. There we go. The man in the middle. And so, again, we talk about kind of our direct care workforce crisis. And so that's the positions that we're always hiring for, tends to be, right? And certainly, we have people leaving on other levels within our organizations, but kind of the most turnover is with that direct care staff, which makes it even more important for us to be investing in our mid-level managers and supervisors, because they provide the stability, they have the history, oftentimes they have the institutional knowledge, and they have the ability to really, through continuity of services, really kind of keep your retention rates and have a more positive income. I'm sorry, not income, more quality outcome in terms of employment outcomes for the people that you serve. Any thoughts on that? So what's interesting, though, is that this supervisory level has to really kind of, they're the ones that have to, hear and take direction and kind of report to and receive kind of directives from upper management. They then have to kind of figure out how they're going to translate that down to their staff. And so there's always a pull there, right, what their staff needs and what they need their staff to do based on kind of their directives. And so they're kind of always flowing between these two groups. And so again, they're such an important role. And if we're empowering them and making sure that they have the supports necessary and really good training and feeling competent and confident, they can really kind of take that directive, make it make sense, and make sure that they're putting the right people in the right supports on the ground, kind of on the boot level there. At the same time, this mid-level manager has to balance all of the customer's needs. And so if you think about who your customers are, and some people say different things, right? So when if I was just to ask who your customers are, some people will say individuals served, some people might say families, some people will say employers, some people won't say employers, and some people will say, kind of other groups. And so really the three that we're going to focus on today are the job seeker, and certainly their family is very important in that. And we need to be, making sure that we are engaging our family members. But, really our top three customers are job seeker, the employer, and the funding source. And all three of those have the same desire, right? The job seeker wants a good job that they can feel good in, that they're, kind of bringing their skills to, not just doing the crap. The employer wants somebody who wants to work. They don't want a program. They want an employee who wants to be there, who can get the job done. And the funding source wants that good job match, because if they're getting that good job match, certainly their resources are going towards kind of what their purpose is, what their funding and their intentions are. Does that make sense? And our direct care staff, our frontline staff work, kind of walk down these two roads, right? So you have, most of the people who come into this field, are thinking, it's a human service position, and we're here to work with and support people who have intellectual and developmental disabilities. And there's a skill set for that. Not everybody can do that. But at the same time, when you're working in the employment field, you also have to be able to work to kind of walk down that employer path as well, right? Really understanding businesses' needs, which are different than the individuals that we support needs. And they need to be able to really kind of understand and operate the mission of the organization and have that meet there in the middle at the very top point, so that they can, again, balance all of those customers' needs. So it's really a challenging position. We talk about certainly the pay rate needs to be increased for those staff, but when we look at carrying these two skill sets, again, we focus on training of those staff, but again, don't forget that importance of that manager and supervisor who's going to really help them when they come to that kind of middle road there and help them kind of balance that. Any thoughts on that?
You know, Janine, that's something that we're going through pretty heavy right now. That whole thought of, well, first of all, I'm just going to say that we lost pretty much all of our long-term staff, right? So we're in reconstitution mode, and we were fortunate to have staff take on these roles, and oftentimes they were staff providing services in other areas. And so the positive for me is that some of those staff are people who worked historically in the residential side. So I feel like now I've got a natural bridge, right, to kind of connect over to that realm. But that idea of there's more than one customer here is challenging when they've come from a world where the customer truly was just the individual and in large sense the family members, right? And that idea as the employer is also a customer, right? For us I think is important, right? And I know you were saying that some people don't really view it that way, but I think it's just as important, right, for us to be meeting that employer's need as it is for finding the right job for the individual. And I think that in this building phase, that's what's been coming up a lot, right? Where it's solely focused on what the individual wants, right? And not really taking into the broader picture of the employer needs, which, you know, I think for where we found some success is really just taking the individual out of it and understanding, having them refocus on what would be true for them and their life, right? Like you as an employee want the group that's employing you happy, right? Right. That's the part, right? So it's really just connecting it. And I think it's a nice opportunity to kind of break down some of those barriers and really understanding that it's all the same, right? We're all doing the same thing. And so, but yeah, we've been seeing that a lot.
Yep. And I think it can lead to some greater job satisfaction when staff really start to kind of understand that their role is even bigger than maybe they once thought it was. And so, you know, again, you know, keying in on that really strong supervisor or mid-level manager, who's ever kind of supporting those staff, really kind of bridging them, you know, walking them down those roads to really kind of see that big picture. And then you see the great outcomes, which then, you know, of course, makes you feel great. And then, you know, why would you want to leave your job then? Any other thoughts?
Yeah, we build our quality outcomes over effectiveness, efficiency, and satisfaction. Effectiveness is placements, efficiency is maximizing our funding streams. And then we do ask employers, we send out a satisfaction survey. You know, was the staff knowledgeable? Did you get the employee that you promised? Was the supports there that we promised? And our motto is under promise and over deliver on our supports.
I love that you're doing that. And that's an important thing. I won't even have to mention it now. Yes, it's really key. It's really critical to not only be doing satisfaction surveys of your staff, the individuals you serve, but those employers as well. Key to being able to really kind of look at your service delivery and maintain quality improvements. So as we do this, as we kind of, you know, decentralize our services and we're moving more into the community and we're, you know, kind of working with employers in the community, we can't just add a new path. It's not just as simple as saying, okay, new direction, we're going to add a new, like this picture, we're going to add just a new roadway to kind of take a detour. That's not how it works, right? And so we need to make sure that our team, and again, it comes from the managers and the supervisors, that their team resources and assignments and competencies are always directed towards that same target, goal, and objective. So it's always targeted to that road in the middle, that we're meeting those 3 customer needs all of the time. And without that manager and supervisor having the, you know, being empowered and having the resources and skills that they need, it's always going to be a challenge and they're not going to be as effective. And you'll start to see even more turnover in that role as well. And again, as I said earlier, you know, that's the one role that really can provide stability and continuity. And so if we're losing that level, then we've got even a harder road to climb, harder mountain to climb, I guess, harder road to travel. So effective managers are those who can set targets and again, use their resources in the best possible way they can so that they're meeting their outcomes. And they achieve all of those targets with the assistance of organizational resources. So effective managers are able to use those resources efficiently and effectively. Any thoughts on that or any ideas about kind of thoughts on what well, actually I have a question, kind of what makes oh, that's not my question. I'm sorry. Going back, what kind of makes a high quality manager? Is there certain traits that you look for in supervisors or managers? I see you're ready, Tom, because I saw you nodding.
Yeah,
I oftentimes see that in our fields, we do a disservice, and that if you've been in your role for quite a while and you're good at it, you kind of automatically get promoted to a supervisor or a manager. And although our frontline staff absolutely need a career ladder, a career pathway, that's not always helpful for the person and certainly not for the quality of your services.
sure. Yeah, that's true. Both I think that happens, and I've actually done that. So I am also guilty of that, and the poor outcomes that come from it, right? And so you kind of learn from those experiences. But I think what I start looking for, even early on, are direct service professionals who intuitively see the bigger picture, can see not just what's happening in their lane, but 2 and 3 lanes over, or even above the interstate, like your picture, right? To kind of have a view and ask those questions. So I love somebody who asks a lot of questions about the whys, and the hows, and then independence. And of course, my core is always integrity. I've got to trust that the person's going to ask a question rather than pretend like they know, right? And so when I see somebody who has that kind of confidence, and that kind of internal fortitude, and then has those other balances, some of that stuff you can grow, right? If somebody doesn't intuitively like to see the big picture, doesn't normally see the big picture, you can kind of teach somebody to do that. But I can't teach them the integrity. I can't teach them the natural inquisitiveness or curiosity about things, right? And so if I don't see those things, I'll probe for them. But that's what I want to see when I'm looking at, somebody who is willing to be a manager, willing to be a supervisor. Because if they can see the big picture, then the other stuff becomes easier when you have to make decisions about other things, right? Then they're capable of explaining those decisions to other people rather than, hey, we have to do this. I don't know why, just do it. I know it's unpleasant, right? Nobody likes that, right? You have to have somebody be able to connect the dots all the way downstream. And I think those personalities that can see the big picture and have that curiosity to ask and have that internal integrity just make great matches in those roles.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And they have to be empowered to be able to do those things. Christy, were you going to say something?
No, I agree with Tom. My best job developers have always been quirky and outgoing, and they don't care if they get no's. In fact, they find no's a challenge, and it takes a while to find the right person, but when you do, it's like butter. And I've also had the other, but the trust, and because they have a lot of autonomy, they're not sitting in an office where you walk by and see them. So you really have to have trustworthy people who are ethical and have integrity, because they're very autonomous. And I've had people in the past where I found out they weren't doing what they were supposed to be doing. And it really, then the placement suffers, and the person in the job suffers, and the employer suffers. So I agree completely with Tom. It takes a really strong ethical person to take that autonomy and do it well.
Do you think that an effective manager for employment services or employment and day services needs to have actually done the job to be more effective, or no?
I think it
I
helps.
don't, I think there's a spool up, right? I mean, when you talk about effective, right? Will they be effective coming over? Probably not, right? But can they be effective? Absolutely, right? I mean, I think there's just, and again, because they've successfully found right? Like this is what it's like walking. Like if you've learned to do it, and you can do this, right? It's just then finding out and breaking down the barriers that this is somehow different for the person you're working with. It may look different. There may be different jobs or different ways of going about doing it, but it's the same process. It's the same barriers, it's the same issues, the same core, what are you interested in? What are those core strengths that you can then match to a job in the world, right? They've done that themselves personally. So, it's just getting them to see that it's no different. And then, like I said, building that, once they get that experience, right, and they start building it, I think the will to do it is probably the most relevant. And then, like I said, those personality traits where I agree with Chrissy that like the autonomy part is huge, right? These folks aren't around, right? You've got to trust that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, and trust that they're telling you when there's issues, right? So that nothing comes back around. But yeah, I don't think you need to have done this to do it, right? I think you will eventually be more efficient as you learn better ways and of communicating and connecting and getting out. That's probably the hardest thing, getting out from the person what their skills are and what their interests are, right? That's probably a skill that's not, or is a skill that's underappreciated. I don't think people can just do that. You have to kind of find a way and get a path to be effective at getting at those things.
Agreed. And we go round and round for when we're looking for a supervisor or a manager, like that's kind of the, like, do they need to have done it? And I would agree that no, but they need to be empowered to make the right decisions. They need to understand what the outcome and the objective is, and they need the tools to do it. But if they don't understand, right, if our managers or supervisors are really just kind of sitting behind a desk and they don't understand the process, then you get a lot of kind of nothing, right? And they need to be able to, I'm sorry, go ahead. Rich.
I just want to jump in. The one question that I enjoy asking to, find that perfect employment specialist is, you walk into a room with 50 people and none of them, what do you do? And if you find that person is, I need to meet every single one of them, that's the person you're looking for. But then I think it's one of the things that we've kind of done a poor job with is building up some of those other leadership skills and supervision skills for those types of staff. So we might find that right personality, but then it's upon us to then teach them the rest of those skills to be an effective, great leader. And so we'll struggle with, I think, in our field a little bit.
No, agreed. Well, and that's kind of why this kind of thought kind of came about. Again, if we're spending our resources training our frontline staff, but really not spending more time and spending more resources on that middle tier, we're going to be kind of stuck in this pattern, right? And how many of us have, you have a supervisor or a manager and, there's that competing priority. Someone needs supports and someone needs to be doing employer engagement and building employer relationships. And so, oftentimes staff just get pulled and they don't have the time. And those managers need to make sure that they have staffing patterns so that the staff have time to go out and develop those relationships and continue to follow up. Because again, without that, if we're always pulling them, and if the manager's not understanding that, or doesn't have the staffing and isn't able to staff the programs adequately, not given the shortness of staff, but, you know, kind of using their resources to the best that they can, that real long-term employer relationship building just won't happen. And so again, it's going to affect the quality of your outcomes in the long run. Questions or thoughts? All right, well, feel free to interrupt me. I won't have to ask you the question because we just talked about that. So we talked about our 3 customers, individual, employer funding source. And so there's one goal, one target, right? That the job match meets everybody's needs. And I already just mentioned it. So the job seeker wants a job that they like to do, that they feel like they can offer their skills towards, not just doing a job because one was open and they're doing the crap that nobody else wants to do. The employer wants that person who wants to be there and can do the job. And then your funding source obviously wants you to meet those outcomes. They want you to make that employer happy and they want you to make that job seeker happy. That's what their funding is looking for. And feel free to add anything if I'm missing anything, please. So what tools do we need as organizations? But, you know, again, looking at that middle tier, what tools did they need? You know, so we need to have a set of core employment competencies and training modules so that the managers and the supervisors are understanding that, invested in that, so they know the how to, even if they haven't done that themselves, and to be able to make sure their staff have the competencies and the training that they need, because they're going to be the ones making sure that their staff are getting what they need. Standard operating procedures and practices, obviously, and consistent service delivery tools for employment team members. So without those things and without your managers and supervisors having those, really understanding those and making sure that they're delivering that information appropriately and effectively to their staff, that's where we need to be focusing our time and efforts. Anything else on that?
You know, Janine, I send all my job developers to that ACRE training.
Mm-hmm.
And they all get their certification. And that kind of helps invest in their skill set.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Christy, can I ask which ACRE training program you use?
We
There's
use
so
it. Yeah, it's out of Denver. We have a relationship with one of the providers that does it out of Denver. So used to be CTAT. I don't remember what their name is now. They've kind of morphed, but we know the
okay.
trainer.
The old CTAT. Okay, that helps me. I know them. Yeah.
Okay, so the employment flow. So from an organization's perspective, right, we get a referral. We're making sure we have the right referral, because oftentimes it just goes to like an agency, and some organizations are really big and maybe referrals made and you're not sure who they're deciding what program maybe that they're going to. But from an organization perspective, we get a referral. We do some sort of an assessment or a variety of assessments, but really making sure we're understanding who the person is, what they want to do, what their talents really are. Like we're, you know, kind of what's the environment that they're going to do best in, you know, kind of what are their support needs that maybe will always be there, maybe can be assisted with some sort of technology. Like we're doing this assessment piece. And at the same time, as we're learning about the person, we're coming up with a career plan, right? What makes sense for the person? Then we're making that appropriate job match. And then we provide any follow-along support that's necessary. And for some, that might be indefinite. For some, it might be short-term, short-lived. Did I miss anything there? A step? Nope. All right, good. But from the employer's perspective, and again, this is something that managers and supervisors need to understand, is that, you know, there needs to be an initial contact, right? We're not very effective if we're just kind of responding to online. We do it, but we're not as effective if we're just kind of willy-nilly kind of, you know, making maybe some connections. But, you know, we really need to kind of make that initial contact and have some sort of an informational interview, whether it's just talking about that employer's needs or whether it's actually kind of touring the site and seeing all the different things. But we need to have that informational interview so we can determine what their needs are and how we can best meet their needs, right? Because for the employer, for their perspective, they want return on investment, right? They want an employee who's going to be able to meet their needs. again, from their perspective, there needs to be some sort of a proposal. Like, I see that you have these needs, kind of whatever that looks like. This is your greatest turnover area, or these are things that your other employees get bogged down doing that would be great for Steve to be doing, whatever that looks like. It needs to be a proposal with that job match. And then we provide the follow along support. And then we maintain that relationship, right? We're always kind of making sure that that employer is, happy. Do they know other employers that maybe they could introduce us to? But they're then part of our partners, that we're always maintaining that relationship. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that business relationship is so important because that's where you get multiple placements. And that pipeline, you keep that pipeline open so that you can reduce the amount of time someone's looking for a job till they actually get a job.
Right. And again, if you just look at from the organizational perspective, it's different than the employer's perspective. And so that's where, again, that key manager or supervisor needs to understand both perspectives, because if they don't, it's not going to work, right? And staff won't really know what they should be doing and won't get the support that they need. I know Rick McAllister, for those who know him, refers to it as, I think it's called nick logging. I'd never heard about it, but when all the logs would be cut and go downstream, there's a person's key responsibility is to kind of keep those logs moving so they don't get dammed up and stop the process. And so, he equates that to, kind of the manager, right? They're nicking those logs. They're making sure that this process has a continual flow and it's not getting jammed up anywhere and it all just kind of blows up on us. I've never heard of nick logging before.
That's kind of awesome. I'm wondering, is he in Oregon or Washington? I'm just curious.
I think Vermont.
Okay, that would count too.
But I love the kind of the visual of that to me, because it just makes so much sense, right? Like that manager, that's what they're doing, right? This person's here, this person's here. Oh, we got to make sure that. So it's a great analogy. So a question on just, kind of if you're looking at your staff who are approaching employers, and Christy, you have specific job developers, but there's some organizations who might not. So, I have my staff do kind of more of everything. They job develop, case manage, and job coach, but knowing how we're approaching employers is really critical. And so do your managers or supervisors know how their staff are approaching employees? And do they know that they need to know that? Because intuitively, you wouldn't think that that's something that you need to teach. You would think that they would just know that.
We actually
I think there's some pitfalls there. And well, at least my personal belief is that there's pitfalls that I try to communicate, and especially with a new group, right? I think, in our old iteration, I was very confident about how people were connecting with employers, but I think the default for people who are likely unexperienced or just don't have a lot of time in the position is to approach the employer from a program perspective with a disability first, right, instead of looking for a job, right? And you had said it earlier, and it is critical, right? You may find an employer who's interested in hiring a person with a disability in a program. I think that the natural outcome will likely be that won't be a real job for that individual. It'll probably be something resembling a token placement on their roles. And so we really I want to make sure that when the staff are engaging, that we're not upselling the fact that this is this person with a disability, right? That, how great is it going to be for you to be taking part in this, right? It really isn't. Like, I mean, because I don't think you're going to get the outcomes that you want with that. And it sets up a weird dynamic where the employer is connecting with you rather than the person, right? And it just kind of it's a poor way to start, I think.
Right. And then when that
And-
person leaves, what happens to the
Right, right.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
We
Christy?
have our staff, I have them practice their opening lines. That spiel to get in to see the decision maker in a business. We work on how do you handle objections, because there's some pretty consistent objections businesses will put up. We have a pretty extensive needs analysis that kind of gets at, high turnover positions, hard to recruit positions, and then really just talking the business lingo. They want a return on their investment. They want someone who's going to contribute to the success of their business. And we don't even talk program. It's really, we have someone that we know is motivated, reliable, dependable. You have this need, and our job is to match that and make sure it's a good placement.
Right. We use lots of jargon that doesn't make any sense to employers. So, perfect. So there's really 4 doors. I call it 4 doors. So, we're approaching employers both formally and informally, right? So formally, maybe the job seeker's doing some online job search. That's the way the world is. You've got to do some of that. Maybe our staff are attending career fairs, chamber events, those kinds of things. And then the more informal way, which is even more effective in terms of long-term placements, is, we're really looking at who the job seeker knows, right? Or who do we know? Who do we already know? And so again, this is something that, our managers and supervisors need to be aware of and understand so that they can support their staff to be doing that with their job seekers. So for example, we hired someone not that long ago. We were super excited. They had experience with another local organization. And the feedback that he had given us was that it felt so different because in his prior job, he was just like, they were kind of like, why are you here? You need to just be out there knocking on doors and talking to people. Instead of, really kind of looking at who do I already know? Where should I begin? Let me start having conversations and building my network. So the power of networking, just my slide there, right? So you start looking at, and we have our staff do these relationship mapping exercises, because if you think about just the people who and then you add on everybody else's, it's probable that someone to have a relationship with an employer that would be a great match for someone that you're working with. And so it would be a win-win for the employer and the person.
So Janine, this is something that I took from one of your other presentations a while ago. Maybe we were talking about this, maybe you were presenting something on this, but I just hadn't really even thought about it. And it's such a natural, and we're cooking it back into our rebuilding, which is essentially when you've got that successful placement and things are going well, that business has probably 5 or 6 other supply chains that connect to that, and just asking them, okay, well, who is it that you work with to get yours right? And then it just like naturally feeds itself, right? Of sending that web out, of giving you opportunities and connections to other areas that you probably hadn't even considered before, right? And whether or not something comes of it in that moment is irrelevant. It's the exposure to the fact that that business is there. This is what they do. Let me look into that. Do I have people, right, that would fit into that realm nicely, that would enjoy, right? Because there's a billion jobs that I just didn't even know there were businesses for. Like there's a business that does this. That's great. Okay, great. Right. And so
I'm always astonished.
Yeah, you don't know what you don't know. And that's a great way to uncover that. So
Well,
thank you for sharing that.
It's helpful too. So you've heard me say this before, right? So employment strong community, true integrated supports, and employment, which is what we're talking about today. It's everyone's job. Everyone has a piece of it. And when staff start feeling like they can contribute, and it could be as easy as just saying, hey, my mom owns a garden center, just so-and-so, I'll introduce you to them. They're part of that process and they start thinking that way too, but it doesn't mean that they have to like kind of do that scary formal presentation, which, if you're coming to this field because you really want to support someone and do great things, you're not necessarily that person who really likes to go in kind of cold and do that formal kind of presentation. So it really allows opportunities for everybody to get involved. Any thoughts on that? As opposed to, I feel like, going back to the person who we hired, because all of our staff aren't sales kind of minded, it can be intimidating talking to employers. And so oftentimes we see a little bit about that, like rushing into it. They're so excited, right? Like, oh my God, the employer's willing to talk to me. Yay. Will you hire this person? Like there's no kind of, so I equate that to like meeting someone on a first date and asking them to marry you the next day. Like there needs to be that, like, who are you? How do we do this together? Do we make sense to do this together? And so because our staff oftentimes don't have that and aren't necessarily supported to kind of see it in a different way, that's a lot of what you get. Any of you have experience with that with any of your staff or even yourself? Like if you were ever right? Like you're just so excited. You don't want them to say no. So, and then you promise everything, right? Oh, they'll be here every single day. They'll never take a day off and they won't do anything wrong. And they'll have higher production than the rest of your staff. And I'll be here and things are going to be just magical. And right, that's in your overselling. Like it's just going to be a mess. So making sure.
Yeah, that and it all happens in 5 minutes because they're talking so fast, right?
Right.
It's like they're just running through it, right? And it's overwhelmed. It's like, oh, what? Wait a minute,
right?
So yeah,
and the employer might even say yes just to get you out the door. Like,
right.
Jeannie, I love that analogy, and I know Rick has shared that a lot, and I've that we don't ask for marriage after the first date. We don't ask for a job after the first meeting. We've got to build those partnerships up, and that's been a tool that I've always taken from Rick and shared with my employment specialists is how can we build that relationship up with that business, because we want a good business, and then like you said even earlier, referrals to other businesses down the road and things like that. So I appreciate that. That's just a great reminder for us.
And again, because we're really talking about this, that middle level of your staffing, do they understand that? Right? Because they have a lot of pressure from funding sources and possibly from other people in the organization to hit a specific number of placements. And so if they're under pressure and they don't really understand and aren't able to communicate how taking our time and doing this the right way will not only get people jobs, but will get other opportunities because businesses are happy. People will hold on to their jobs, and longer, possibly even have more of a career. So that middle level really needs to be able to understand that and communicate it again, kind of to all of those different levels.
You didn't mention it in your list, but something that we've often found is that, there can also be a lot of pressure from families and teens, right? Like, how come how come they don't have a job yet? Why is this taking so long? And it puts pressure on the individual. It puts pressure on the employment consultant who's doing that work, right? And I think it's hard. Well, probably for that individual, it would be equally hard if the people that they're employed for are giving them grief about their quota, like, hey, how come you haven't placed yet? That would be difficult, but it is a skill to navigate that pressure from teams and families, right? Like that's hard, right? And we've had placements that happen because of pressure, right? And they don't go well, right? And then you're back in the search again, right? Not long after that. But that's an area that I think requires some support and navigation and education as well for staff.
Absolutely. Yeah, we've had that too. That happens. So a part of this, of course, I like data, but a part of this is making sure that we're collecting the data so that as we're communicating with all of our stakeholders, we can demonstrate and show kind of why we know the process that works best is effective, right? And so we're pulling together different information and able to share, and really even looking at, again, that manager who's deploying or assigning their staff, looking at ways of, who's being more effective and who's not, but not because it's a performance issue, but maybe that other person needs more support, right? So the data shows you where maybe something's breaking down for maybe one staff person, and gives you an opportunity for that manager again to go in there and say, okay, I've noticed this based on the information. How can I assist you? How can I bring in other tools? And so, we'll talk about data a little bit more and I think it's a little bit farther down in the slideshow, but certainly looking at, how many, so informational interviews I already mentioned, which we know are really important, right? Because it gives us the opportunity to build that relationship. And so, if are our managers collecting information on how many informational interviews are our job developers or our staff going on and setting up? And if we're not tracking it, then we just don't know. So we don't know if our staff are following through the process that we know works best or not, right? They could just be that one jumping ahead trying just to get a job. And so tracking how many informational interviews people are having and gaining this information. So again, we can make the proper job placement. Managers being able to support their staff and knowing, finding those jobs before they're posted. Most jobs aren't posted. And so if our staff are feeling like they need to kind of wait for that opportunity and the managers again aren't understanding that, then jobs are gone before we're even looking. And so you have a much greater chance of finding somebody employment if you're not waiting for that opportunity. Any questions or thoughts on that? All right. You've heard me talk about culture. Go ahead.
But the number of jobs that aren't posted, I've heard is over 70% of the jobs are filled were never posted.
Right. And those employees typically are found through people who, like, through that networking process. Like, that's how they get those. So keeping in mind importance of company culture, you've heard me talk about this. So the organization as a whole needs to be speaking and promoting that employment's highly valued, that it's not just like sister part of what we do. Everyone in the agency knows the importance of employment and has a role to play. So going back to just that relationship mapping, like there's a piece that everyone can contribute to. Ongoing development and training for your staff is key, and that all staff are recognized for their contributions. And so when it comes to employment, I feel like in particular, again, if we're valuing and recognizing that someone helped the job developer get in the door because of their contact, we need to value that and let people know that that was really an important piece of the puzzle, right? We're all in this together. We're all contributing and doing what we can to make sure that we're providing really good, high quality employment services. So that really starts with just the culture of the organization. Just ways to do this, setting up a whiteboard so people can write, does anyone know, a person at this XYZ company, those kinds of things, I'm doing a small business sweep. What small businesses do we have in the community? Anybody know any that aren't on this board? Those types of things. But again, that point that everyone can contribute to the process, even if they're not the ones actually kind of making that closing proposal. this goes to those two roads, social service versus employment service. So, looking for easy jobs. All the jobs are always available. Sometimes that works for people. There are some people who do really well working at specific places because that's what they want to do. But we want to move beyond that. Tom, you already said it, selling disability versus the right thing to do. As the right thing to do, it's not about the person having a disability. Again, it's about return on investment, right? Like, we're here to make your company stronger, and in turn, you're giving an opportunity. Like, you're finding an employee who's going to help you do that. Overselling tax credits and stipends just kind of leads to that, like, kind of token. Now, certainly there's benefits that we can offer employers, but I find that going in and selling that first isn't effective, right? Finding that right job match and getting someone hired, and then saying, oh, by the way, there are these tax credits that you could qualify for. If you're interested, I can help you through that process. Cold calling and focusing on just the job seeker's needs. And I'm not saying, I'm not contradicting customized employment, right? Because in that particular arena, we're really focusing on the job seeker's needs, but we're also focusing on the employer's needs. But I'm just saying, we're not going to a business like kind of that quick proposal, hire Joe because he loves radios and he'd be a good fit. Like, it's, again, what's the return on investment for both parties? We reviewed this job development, you're making that contact, you're negotiating, you're following up. And again, making sure that your managers and your supervisors have what they need to make sure that they're staffing appropriately. They've got the right people doing the right things. So we're tracking contacts. We're tracking interviews, we're tracking proposals, how many actual formal proposals are we making with companies, and then we're tracking placements, as well as retention, how long are people employed, how long are people unemployed, hourly wages, certainly, we track time to placement and change in placement. So it's, how long does it take us to get somebody a job? But then let's say that they get promoted, right? And so then there's a note they got promoted, and then we kind of track that as well. All those kinds of things. Anything else that you all might track that I haven't mentioned? I do like tracking it by as a whole in terms of a team, but then by individual staff, because as I mentioned earlier, that's where you can see, Joe maybe made 10 informational interviews, but he's gotten 8 placements, where, Sue might have made 20 informational interviews, but she hasn't gotten any placements. Like, just so you can kind of see where your staff are at and what they might need and what's working best as a team. Any questions? I kept that right to an hour. Anything that you might do differently? Or a takeaway? Any takeaways? Rich, you already said it. Don't make the marriage proposal.
Right. I liked a lot of Christie's suggestions. Like, I haven't done employer surveys, satisfaction surveys. And I really like that. I think how we've measured that in the past is just kind of anecdotally, right? Just word of mouth. How are things going? Are they happy? Are they not happy? And I like the idea of having that quantified in a satisfaction survey. And I'm almost positive, but I'm going to double check because I liked it. Also, is doing the role play pitch, right? Especially for new folks as we're developing things. Really like that. And like I said, I'm almost positive she's doing that, but I'll be taking that back and double checking.
You know, one of the last questions on our survey is, if you are really satisfied with our services, is there another business you would be willing to refer us to?
Yep. That's
I
awesome.
can send a sample, when I send Maria the PowerPoint, I can send a sample employer satisfaction survey. But then Christy, maybe if you're willing to share yours as well, I
Okay,
can give you all some ideas of kind of, maybe things that you might want to ask. The important thing though is, I'm sorry.
I was just going to ask if you or anyone has a good tool that kind of shows when you're approaching that business and you're starting to develop that relationship, that shows the responsibilities of the job coach, which is easy, we know that, but the responsibilities of the business as well. Does anybody have a good tool to show businesses kind of their responsibilities? I think sometimes they just, well, the employment specialist is going to do it all. And it's kind of hard for an employment specialist to do when they've been on the job 2 days, like the employees.
I'm making a note.
I haven't
Mhm.
found a good tool. I should probably make
I
one.
have something similar, but it's not for the business. It's really for the job seeker and their family.
Me too.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I'll look
Okay.
around. That's a great one. I'll certainly ask around and see if I can find something, or, maybe I'll try to draft something and I can send it to you all and you can give me feedback.
Okay.
Perfect. All right. Well, you know where to reach me. There's my contact just in case.
Yeah, this has been great. Good interactions. And I'm glad we're sharing all these resources. This is wonderful. This is why we have these. So thank you, Janine, and thank you all for coming. When Janine does get me her slides, I will send those out along with the recording. And then also if Christy wants to get me that survey, and then Janine has a survey as well for the employer satisfaction, you're just going to get a lot of resources. So this is great. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good rest of your day.